December 31st, 1943. Algiers. The Mediterranean air was unseasonably cold as General Dwight D. Eisenhower sat alone in his office, the dim light of a desk lamp casting long, jagged shadows against the wall. Before him lay a single sheet of paper, the formal order that would change the course of human history. He had just been officially named Supreme Allied Commander for Operation Overlord. To the world, this was a promotion of unparalleled prestige. To Ike, it was a death sentence for thousands of young men he had yet to meet. He knew that the liberation of Europe didn't just require a great crusade. It required a miracle of logistics, diplomacy, and ego management. But as Eisenhower stared into the gloom, his mind wasn't on the German Atlantic Wall or the treacherous tides of the English Channel. It was on a man currently 1,500 miles away, Bernard Law Montgomery. Monty had just arrived back in England, greeted by a flurry of press cameras and the adulation of a British public desperate for a hero. He was a Spartan general, the victor of El Alamein, a man who carried himself with a brittle, supreme confidence that bordered on the divine, while Eisenhower was the quintessential chairman of the board, a man of smiles, handshakes, and the agonizing pursuit of consensus. Montgomery was a singular force of nature. He didn't build consensus. He issued decrees. The global stakes could not have been higher. The Soviet Union was bleeding the Wehrmacht dry in the east and demanding a second front. Across the Atlantic, American industrial might was peaking, and with it, an American demand for total control of the war's direction. The alliance was a fragile marriage of necessity, held together by the thin thread of shared purpose. As 1944 dawned, these two men, one an American who had never led troops in combat before 1942, the other a British traditionalist who believed he was the finest soldier since Wellington, were set on a collision course. The fate of the free world rested not just on their brilliance, but on whether they could survive each other. January 15th, 1944. St. Paul's School, London. The war rooms inside this Victorian red brick building were thick with the smell of stale tobacco and the nervous energy of high-ranking officers. In the center of the great hall, a massive map of the Normandy coast was stretched across the floor. General Bernard Montgomery, wearing his signature black beret, paced across the map like a theater director measuring his stage. When Eisenhower walked in, the contrast was immediate. Ike moved with a heavy, rhythmic gait, his face lined with the exhaustion of managing 1,000 moving parts. Monty, by contrast, was lean, bird-like, and radiating an almost uncomfortable intensity. Montgomery didn't waste time with pleasantries. He had spent the last 2 weeks tearing apart the original Cossack plan for the invasion. To him, the plan was muddled. He demanded more troops, a wider landing zone, and total control over the ground forces. Eisenhower listened, his jaw tight. He knew Monty was right about the scale. The invasion needed more muscle. But he also felt the prickle of Montgomery's condescension. To Monty, Eisenhower was a political general, a man better suited for a boardroom than a battlefield. The tension in the room was a microcosm of a deepening national rift. The British, scarred by the memory of the Somme and Dunkirk, were cautious, favoring a set-piece approach where every show was counted and every risk mitigated. The Americans, fueled by a booming war economy and a can-do spirit, wanted to use overwhelming force to smash through the German lines and race for Berlin. As the weeks passed, the planning sessions became a battlefield of their own. Montgomery began bypassing Eisenhower's staff, communicating directly with London, and treating the Supreme Commander as an equal, or worse, a subordinate in matters of real soldiering. Eisenhower, under immense pressure from Washington to assert American dominance, found himself walking a razor's edge. If he reined Monty in too hard, he risked fracturing the British alliance. If he let him run loose, he risked losing control of the Great Crusade. By the spring of 1944, the two men had carved out a functional, yet brittle, truce. But the true test wouldn't be found in the maps of London. It would be found in the blood-soaked sands of France. June 7, 1944. Aboard the HMS Apollo, off the coast of France. The sun rose over a horizon choked with smoke and the twisted wreckage of the previous day's landings. For Eisenhower, the last 24 hours had been an agonizing vigil. He had spent the night of June 5th wandering among the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne, his face a mask of forced cheer, while a letter of resignation, to be used in case of failure, sat folded in his pocket. Now, as reports filtered in from the 5 beaches, the relief was momentary, replaced instantly by a cold, hard reality. The invasion had succeeded, but the battle was being lost. Montgomery had landed in France with his typical flair, setting up his tactical headquarters in a caravan nestled in a quiet orchard. He was serene, almost attached. To him, the chaos of the initial landings was a mere prologue. He had promised the liberation of the pivotal city of Caen on D-Day itself. But as the morning of June 7th wore on, Caen remained firmly in German hands. The elite 21st Panzer Division had dug in, turning the city into a fortress. Back in England, and then later during his visits to the bridgehead, Eisenhower watched the maps with growing alarm. The Americans at Omaha Beach had barely survived the slaughter. Now, they were pushing into the bocage, a nightmare landscape of ancient, impenetrable hedgerows. Eisenhower needed a breakout. He needed movement. He needed the British and Canadians under Montgomery to seize, Caen, and draw the German armor away from the American sector. But Monty wouldn't be rushed. He viewed Eisenhower's pleas for speed as the impatience of a novice. In Montgomery's mind, he was conducting a masterpiece of attrition, deliberately pulling the German panzers toward the British sector to allow the Americans room to maneuver. To the American generals, specifically the firebrand George S. Patton, it looked like British timidity. The friction between the two men began to leak into the press. Headlines in London praised Montgomery's masterly caution, while whispers in Washington suggested that Eisenhower was being bullied by his British subordinate. As the summer heat began to bake the fields of Normandy, the stalemate became a symbol of a deeper strategic paralysis. Eisenhower's patience, legendary as it was reaching its breaking point. The Great Crusade was stalled, and the man responsible was the one man he couldn't fire. August 20th, 1944. The Falaise Pocket, France. The stench of death in the Normandy countryside was so overwhelming that pilots flying thousands of feet above the battlefield reported the smell of decay filling their cockpits. Below, the German 7th Army was being systematically annihilated. The stalemate had finally broken, but the victory had left a bitter aftertaste in the Allied High Command. While the Americans had performed a daring Cobra breakout, Montgomery's slow, methodical squeeze from the north had allowed thousands of German soldiers to slip through the gap before it finally closed. To Eisenhower, the lesson was clear. The broad front strategy was the only way to win. He wanted to push toward the Rhine on a massive scale, stretching the German defenses until they snapped. But Montgomery had a different, more audacious, and many argued, more arrogant plan. Meeting in a cold, damp tent in northern France, Montgomery looked Eisenhower in the eye and demanded that all Allied resources, all the fuel, and all the supplies be diverted to him. He proposed a single, pencil-like thrust into the heart of Germany, Operation Market Garden. He promised it would end the war by Christmas. Eisenhower was torn. His logistical experts warned that the Allied supply lines, still running from the Normandy beaches, were at a breaking point. Yet, the political pressure was suffocating. The British public needed to feel they were leading the final charge, and Montgomery's confidence was infectious. Despite his deep-seated misgivings and the vocal protests of his American generals, Eisenhower gave the green light. It was a rare moment where the chairman of the board deferred to the icon, a decision that would haunt the final months of 1944. Market Garden was a disaster. The bridge too far at Arnhem became a graveyard for the British 1st Airborne Division. As the autumn rains turned the European plains into a quagmire, the war did not end by Christmas. Instead, the Allied advance ground to a halt. In the silence of the winter woods, the two commanders stopped speaking through intermediaries and began a series of sharp, stinging letters. The mask of Allied unity wasn't just slipping. It was being torn away. May 7th, 1945. Reims, France. The red brick schoolhouse that served as Eisenhower's supreme headquarters was quiet, save for the rhythmic scratching of pens. After 5 years of global carnage, the German High Command was signing the instrument of unconditional surrender. But as the ink dried, The two men who had orchestrated the victory in the West were further apart than ever. The final months of the war had pushed their relationship to a terminal fracture. During the desperate winter of the Battle of the Bulge, Montgomery had held a press conference that nearly shattered the alliance. He had claimed, with a tone of insufferable smugness, that he had stepped in to save the Americans from a disaster of their own making. It was a lie that sent Eisenhower into a rare, blinding rage. For the first time, Ike had drafted a cable to the combined chiefs of staff. It is him, or me, only the frantic intervention of Montgomery's own chief of staff, who forced the general to sign a groveling letter of apology, saved Monty's career. Eisenhower, ever the diplomat, accepted the apology, but the warmth was gone forever. As the guns fell silent across Europe, the world celebrated. But for Eisenhower and Montgomery, the war's end was the beginning of a cold, historical rivalry. Eisenhower would go on to the White House, using his reputation as the great unifier to lead the free world through the Cold War. Montgomery would remain a military icon, though his later years were spent writing memoirs that meticulously and often unfairly critiqued Eisenhower's lack of grip on the battlefield.